And welcome to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Stacey, and today is MCK Friday. Joining me in studio are Chief Gina Deer as well as technician Dennis Daibo. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi, thanks.
Today our topic is going to be something we've been talking a little more frequently about, has been the Cannabis Control Act. We've had several people, some community members raise some concerns. So I just want to check in with you. How did the meeting go on Tuesday? Were there a lot of people? Did people raise their concerns? What were some of the things that came out?
We had, I'd say, about 21 community members. There were representatives from our cannabis working group as well as some reporters. So there were, on average, I'd say 21 community members. Some of the concerns, I guess, are why are we adopting the federal legislation? I think that was one of the big ones that came out, and people have to understand that this is going to be a product that's consumed. So for us, you know, what the federal have put in place is about quality assurance and safety, and it's first and foremost in our book. This is why Council is being so proactive on the subject of cannabis, right? So it's not necessarily giving the authority to the federal jurisdiction. It's adopting what they have and what's suited to Kahnawake and ensuring that the product that people are going to consume is safe, because there have been some instances where people say that they're selling medical cannabis, and we know of 2 recent incidents where individuals had seizures because this product is not being tested, right? It's not being done through Health Canada. So when somebody has a condition and they don't know the amounts of CBD or THC in the product, or if anything else is in the product, I mean, you're talking about life and death for some people, because the people utilizing it for, you know, the medicinal side, it's very important they know what they're consuming. So the bottom line is that in terms of going the route of similarity to the federal side, it's because of Health Canada's kind of stamp on it that it's good stuff, not street stuff. Exactly. We're looking at a 2-tiered process, and they're saying, well, that we're giving authority. I said, no, we're not giving authority. We're working in conjunction, and we're ensuring that the product, you know, that comes from this community, if there is to be one, that's a big if, right? That it's going to be safe for human consumption. And the 2-tiered process, you know, we're going to work collaboratively with Health Canada, because they have the people who could come in and test for quality assurance. We don't have the individuals to do that yet. The long-term goal is to have somebody mentored to create a system ourselves, but because the implementation is coming so quickly, we can't prepare for that. You know, we've been talking about the industry and the law, but we're also, you know, I have Dennis here today to talk a little bit also about what MCK is doing for the preparation for employees. So Dennis has been involved in that also. So there's many aspects to this law. It's not just about, you know, drafting the legislation or even the looking at the commercial side. It really does impact our community once that legalization happens. I guess one of the things we talked about last week when Rhonda had come on the show, one of the things we had talked about was, it was interesting, and I'm not sure if this is the government's way of putting it out, made it sound like it was going to be a free-for-all. And then all of a sudden now putting down legislation and bylaws that are going to govern it. But that's only been in the last few months. It's not like when they first made the announcement. Right, and it's been the same thing for consultation with First Nations. Right. It's only been in the recent. So that's why back, you know, I believe it was October or November of 2016, you know, MCK mandated this working group to go out there and do certain things, you know, and we have a mandate. We're working within that mandate. You know, at the meeting, people were bringing up, well, what if this, what if that? You know what? We have our marching orders, and we have to work within those marching orders, and we can't answer for what the future may hold as we get information, and we can't say what council's going to decide, because they're not, we're not done delving into what does all this mean for us. Okay. A question now. Who is on the working group, just to clarify for the community? Yes, I think that's important. We have representatives from the Peacekeepers, which is Dwayne Zachary, the Chief Peacekeeper. We have Derek Montour from KSCS. We have from the hospital, Valerie Daibo. I'm saying Daibo like I couldn't think of her first name. There's Ron Sky from Public Security. And there is Dennis, who is the technician. There's myself and Rhonda as the chiefs who represent MCK. So there is a whole collaboration going here. This is not an MCK initiative. This is really a community initiative.
Okay, you're listening to K1037, Tetewathá. It's MCK Friday, and joining me in studio are our Chief Gina Deer and Dennis Daibo, technician. Maybe we can talk to Dennis a little bit about, some of the other things that are being worked on.
Well, maybe first I'll just add to some of the things that Gina has already touched on, because it was an issue that came up during the community session last Tuesday about MCKs actually implementing the federal law, when really we don't look at importing laws here and using somebody else's law. But the short time frame that we have to address this issue, because it comes into effect on October 17, doesn't give us a lot of time to do a whole range of items that we probably would have done otherwise. She touched on the capacity, so whether or not we have the capacity, and we don't, to develop standards for the type of product that's going to be sold, or the process to control the distribution or access to the product. So we don't have those standards or capacities, so we're using theirs. And if you look at the wording of the law itself, it's Cannabis Control Law. And so what we're doing in that area is controlling what of the federal law will be implemented here. Okay, so we're deciding what from that law is coming here. And we've built a number of aspects of it into our law. And it's really related to the control of access, the safety, the quality of the product, and the licensing, so we know who's involved and who's going to be supplying what. Okay, so it's really geared toward the safety and the control. But the other side of the control, of course, what I'm touching on is the control inside the community, so we know what's being made available to the community is a safe product that they're not going to have a problem with later on. Okay, so that's why I always look at the word control in the name of the law.
Okay,
we're controlling the outside and inside.
I have a question from one of our listeners, and what's being asked is, if it's a community initiative, are there any community members involved? I guess on your committee, or has it not gone that route yet?
No, I mean, for us, we all are community members. We just happened to have different functions within the community. So we have, a duty to protect community, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. I guess we'll take a break, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Stacey, and joining me in studio for MCK Friday are Chief Gina Deer and Dennis Daibo, who's a technician on this particular project. I guess one of the things we were working our way towards is really knowing what are some of the impacts and what is going to happen once this law October 17th comes into place or outside, and what's the impact here within our community? Well, because the more I learn, the more it's bigger and bigger.
Right, it is, and that's what we're trying to let people know, that as we delve into this subject, it expands, right? And Dennis can speak a little bit to what MCK is doing as far as employees and writing policy around it, because of course you can't just be smoking that anywhere or coming to work while you've had smoked an hour before. So Dennis, if you want to give an update on the conference that you had attended.
Mm-hmm. So the conference that I was at, I attended with two other individuals from MCK. So it's the Director of Human Resources and Mary Lee Armstrong, who is the head of our legal services. And the conference we went to was put on by the Academy of Management in Laval. And the conference that they put on is concerning employee and employer rights. once the cannabis law takes effect. And a lot of the topics that were covered, as Gina started to touch on, is the rights of employees related to drug testing, whether it's illegal or legal, what can be done, the requirement for organizations or employers to have a look at a drug policy, so to speak, once the Cannabis Act comes into force. A policy on usage around where the place of employment is. So where can you smoke this stuff, because it's going to be legal to smoke it. The law allows people to be in possession of up to 30 grams at any one time. So how does that relate to the workplace? Are we allowed to have cannabis on us? Or can you have it in your desk, in your locker, or places like that? It also speaks to the health and safety of employees in the workplace. For example, if somebody has a bad batch and they throw a tantrum inside the office, like how do you protect the other employees there? So it covers a wide range of employee rights and issues in the workplace or surrounding the workplace that we've been having discussions internally about. We need to have a look at what kind of policies need to be put in place. And part of it is not necessarily in preparation for, but if we don't have an adequate or a strong policy related to cannabis, it's possible that somewhere down the road, somebody might drag you into court because their rights have been affected in some way. And I think one of the main messages that came out of this workshop was that if you have a strong and comprehensive policy, it'll go a long way towards supporting you and the organization if you end up in a court where people feel that their individual rights have been affected by you refusing to allow them to do certain things that they're allowed to under the Cannabis Act. And so it's a big area that we're not necessarily discussing with the community yet. We're still investigating it, and we're going to have our own internal on how to address
It's interesting, though, because this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes.
I had the chance to talk to Rhonda about that. Like, it's the same thing with the peacekeepers and driving under the influence. Yeah. Under the influence is any mind-altering substance, and a lot of people don't understand that.
Yes.
People assume it's just alcohol, but that's not the case.
No, not at all.
And remember the shift from driving under the influence of alcohol, and then it shifted many years later into any type of mind-altering substances, It's
become quite the challenge, of how do you test for that, when you're driving and those issues. So a lot of research is being done, thankfully, but it's behind the 8 ball. October is coming really quickly, and it's all catch up. I don't care what part of the industry you're talking about. This is all catch up.
So I guess one of the things is, how did you find a priority? The priority is to establish your own law. That's the number one thing, or at least start it. Is that
the priority was establishing our own law? That was first and foremost for council, and ensuring the health and safety of community. Everything else is secondary, for us. We wanted to, emphasize the amount of consultation that has been done, because one of the things that had come up at the meeting was the lack of consultation. And I actually had, Dennis look at some of the work that we did, and he started to document it for me because, my memory is not the best lately. We've been pretty busy with this orientation and working at the same time at MCK. And so anyway, the consultation since we began in 2016 is... it's been an agenda item on 3 of our community meetings. We conducted the community technical survey, and within weeks of the survey results being compiled, we put it out to community. So community was aware as we were. We had a special meeting October 23rd in 2017. There were numerous notices, postings from the KCCL, and a fact and answer question sheet there. There's been feedback reports. There was a community presentation that was also done by MCK around the legal framework, and we had one of our lawyers, Suzanne Jackson, come in October, I believe it was, of 2017, to come in and give this talk to community. We've been consulting with the Kahnawake Peacekeepers, Public Health and Safety, the KSCS, the Cattery Memorial Hospital, Sante Cannabis, the Kahnawake Justice Commission, Tetewathá Zakta, and Academy de Gestation.
Yeah.
What is that?
Not gestation.
Gestion.
Oh, okay.
Something else that applies to you.
I wasn't at that actual part because I've been doing more of the work on the business aspects of it, and Rhonda's kind of been taking over the drafting of the law. It became so busy and there's so much to do that we had to divide like duties between us at one point. Okay, and the other thing we did was we also had an information session around the business aspects with the community. That was done in December of 2017. We've also been talking with the AFNQL, the Thunderbird Foundation, and other First Nations. We've been to conferences, the Cannabis Conference in Toronto, McGill University Institute for Health and Social Policy, the federal government. We had a meeting with Bill Blair, who actually came to Kahnawake, and we gave him a presentation onto what we're doing and where we're at, and he felt we were on the right track for our community. And we've done very, I guess, minimal provincial government consultation. We were part of the AFNQL meetings that had been happening in Quebec, and they met with Quebec, and Derek Montour actually gave a position paper, from MCK at that time. So it's gone beyond community. We've been really reaching out on many levels.
Okay. If you're just joining us, you're listening to K1037, Tetewathá Show. Today is MCK Friday, and my guests in studio are Dennis Thibault and Chief Gina Deer. My question in terms of this, there's been a lot happening, and I guess at that meeting, were there any other issues that the community brought up that you hadn't thought of, or were there questions? Because I think a lot is the unknown. That seems to be the big thing right now.
Well, at that meeting, I think there was a lot of talk around the business aspect, and that meeting was really about the law. Right. And people wanted to talk about the business aspect because they want, in my opinion, a freer market, kind of like tobacco was, right?
Okay.
And we're trying to emphasize the need to have the legislation. You're talking about the product that people are consuming, not just for recreational, but for health reasons, and they have health conditions. It can't be a free market. And people are worried about being shut out of the market, and that MCK just wants to, take over. We're talking about an industry, and if the community is willing to entertain this industry, we want to make sure this time around it's a communal benefit, that it's not going to be a handful of people that will benefit, but everyone will.
And I think that's one of the concerns that the community has, because we're not collectively benefiting from some of these larger things that impacts everybody.
Yes.
And I hear that often.
It's true. And, people don't like when I mention or compare to the tobacco industry, but we've taken the lesson from that. And that's why we're saying, this time around, tobacco is tobacco, and it does have its evils. I mean, we look at cancer and things like that, but this is a mind-altering substance also, right? Like alcohol. And this, to me, is on the same platform as alcohol now.
Yeah.
I treat it in the same fashion. And when people try to tell me, well, no, it's changing the mindset because it's going from illegal to legal. So we have to be very careful and treat it in the same fashion.
I guess for me, I very much compared it to alcohol and a lot of the industries. And if you look at a lot of these things, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and people have talked about this, there were so many campaigns marijuana. It's no good for you. The health. All of a sudden, we're going to make it a law, and this is by government, and we know it's about taxes,
yes.
and we know what it's about, because they're losing industries in terms of alcohol. They're losing the industry of tobacco because people are getting healthier. As people are getting healthier, people need to find a new industry. People are exposing the food industry, and to me, it's all basically the same thing. It started with food and started with sugar and processing, and eventually has gotten to this. And that's always been my big question. What did people learn from it? Because if we keep making the same mistakes, like, people are ready to jump into this without really thinking.
Yes.
What are the impacts? Again, it's going to be starting at, it's a new drug. It's not a new drug. But how we're getting how it's being treated, though, it's like now it's like the best thing. I hate to keep using sliced bread, but I'm using it. Like we're going to come up with something new, and this is the new thing. And I mean, I'm not talking about people who need it for medicinal purposes and that, because it's proven it stuff. But now the research all of a sudden is being over too much over it, and coming out that it's like the best thing. It could cure anything and everything, of all of our health issues, which I have a hard time believing, because I don't believe the government and higher industries, FDA or any of them, because look at where we're at as a very unhealthy society.
Well, you're right about certain things, because it's being pushed by government. It's very hard to trust that.
Yeah.
But being at some of the conferences I have attended and seeing what they're doing in Israel, and the testing and the research that's able to go on there and that was not able to go on here, and looking at all the different things that it helps. It may not cure things, but I believe it was Parkinson's. They said it really helps settle down the shaking. I mean, the seizures, it really, alleviates or eliminates in some people, So there is a lot of research that needs to be done around the product. But for the recreational side, I want people to be realistic, because people are using it. It's here, it's happening, it's going on all around you every day, and it's not going to change drastically. They're predicting from the 2 conferences I've attended, they've predicted that through studies that they did and surveys, there will be a small margin of people who will try using it, but the odds are that they will not be continuous users. There is a large market because of the medicinal side, and the increase on the recreational side, they tell us is going to be significant, because there's a significant underworld black market happening right now. And in order for people to get away from using, this synthetic marijuana that is making people sick or addicted, it'll be a more natural, safe product. So how do you argue that, okay? Because it's going on now. We're not bringing it in. This law is not creating it. It's here. And I think that's what people need to realize. When we look at the commercial side of it, what we're saying is there is a legalization happening here. There is going to be a large industry. It's in the billions already. Why not give it a look to see if there is any room for this in our community? It doesn't mean that we're endorsing the usage of it. I mean, if you look at the draft law, we have the age of 21 in there for possible distribution, if there's to be distribution. A lot of people question that. And Derek stood up at the meeting on Tuesday night and said, listen, from KSDS's point of view, we have suggested 21. Along with the chief peacekeeper at the time, he had also suggested 21. And that's because of the maturing brain, right? We all know that. So if we were to have distribution, it's not about getting people arrested at all. We're saying it stays in line with our values to say, at 21, okay, we'll allow the sale on our territory. Granted, we know people are going to utilize it because they already are, and they're going to obtain it in another way. But from us, this is our limit to allow for our children and consumption.
Yeah. And I think it raises something, because there's a little bit more control, where when you go outside, and what do you think they're going to do? And what is the thing that's addictive in the cannabis? THC.
Right. Yes.
And people don't understand that. It's not necessarily the cannabis itself. It's what people put in it and how they grow it to make sure that it's a more potent more potent batch of there's a lot more to it.
Well, there's been some recent articles, in New York, where they were adding rat poison to it, and people almost died. So, I mean, actually some of them did die. So it's, like I said, it's out there. It's not something new. We're just trying to bring it from the black market to a legal market. Okay,
so now if we get back into what are the things that we need to do. So where are we at with this law? There's going to be one more session for the community to participate.
Yes, these are information sessions, and there was a presentation that was given actually by Dennis, and in the presentation he outlined, what we've been through, where we're at, what we've done. and trying to explain the need for the law, because a lot of people are saying, like, why? So that's their opportunity to ask questions. Now, I want to emphasize, it's not a business meeting around the cannabis. We will be calling another meeting with, people who are interested in the commercial side of it, because we did notice that a lot of people kept going back to kind of the commercial side. We really, really need people to come out prepared to do the law and write the law, right? So the commercial side, yes, we see the need for another meeting from that night, Tuesday, and we're preparing that. I'm hoping within, the next month we can call a meeting on that.
And if I could just add to what Gina is saying, and it goes back to your earlier question about what came out of the discussion last Tuesday. We touched on already, the concern about MCK bringing and implementing the federal law here.
Yeah.
But I said, well, we're controlling what is going to be applied here. And the point of it is that regardless of whether it's an individual getting involved in the business or the business people wanting to have a business, the crux of this federal law that's being imposed on us, it's that it's a criminal code law, and it applies in Kahnawake whether we like it or not. So it touches on a lot of things. The Highway Safety Act or the PKs are required to enforce criminal code or penal code. We're going to be affected by it whether we do anything or not. You can't drive under the influence. You can't go to work under the influence, which we touched on. So this is a criminal code law. And so we're having a look at how are we going to control the issue of cannabis here so that people are not being charged and arrested and things like that. So it's just one other aspect that we are looking at, and it did come out a little bit in the discussion on Tuesday. And while people are focusing on the business and kept going back to it on last Tuesday, I think on the next one we need to maybe highlight the issue about this is criminal code infractions we're talking about here. We really make sure everybody has the information and knows that this is what it's about.
But even outside of here, when this was proposed, and to think it was supposed to be implemented in July, and I started seeing commercials on TV maybe about a month ago, and then they start talking about the highway safety code and arresting people who were under the influence and all of this, but it took long. So if it's happening out there, and we're basically doing catch up here, and here they're just talking about that now, and telling people out there that you're still subject to it.
Absolutely.
And I think it's going to be interesting, because how do you implement, you have a breathalyzer for alcohol, then what do you come up with for this? How do you know someone's under the influence?
Right. Well, from the peacekeeper point of view, we used to do different sort of testing, and I remember with the eyes, it was just all coming out before I had left,
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of training in that, but now they're looking at, like a blood test sort of, when you do your sugar testing, something very simple as that. So there's different things that I keep hearing about. What they're actually going to utilize, I'm not sure. But I think, Dennis is right, though. People have to understand that, this two-tiered licensing that we're talking about is so that people can participate in this industry without having to worry about moving product like in the tobacco industry. They had federal permits, but they had nothing on a provincial side. And then the whole arresting of individuals started to happen, right? We are trying to ensure that we don't go down that road again. We're trying to protect our people who decide to get into the industry. We don't want a repeat again. We're taking a lesson.
Okay. One of the questions is which... who's tougher in terms of legislation? Is it the provincial law or is it the federal law? I'm assuming you've looked at both. And
well, I think the Quebec model, because every province is different, right?
Yes.
What's important here is when it comes to cannabis itself and the testing of the product and all of the inspections and things, it's right across Canada, right? And we're saying, we need to keep in line with that model. So it's I guess universal, you could say. But when you look at what the provinces are doing for distribution, they all have their own model. And Quebec is pretty strict, considering they don't want to allow for homegrown. That's one of the things, that they don't want to see. and they're going to be selling and distributing the model through, Société de Cannabis de Quebec, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be in corner stores or anything like that. So,
and if I could just add to that, concerning who's more strict, like the federal law allows the province to control distribution and sales.
Okay.
And the federal government kept all the rest in terms of setting standards and penalties and things like that, right?
Okay.
So while we haven't had any substantial involvement with the province yet, other than presentations that were made to them, say by Derek or whatever, we haven't had a lot of involvement with them simply because we will not be implementing the Quebec law here, okay? But on the federal side, and we did touch on this on Tuesday about what kind of penalties are attached to anyone that's not in compliance of the federal law. And I have them with me. I can tell you some of them that we spoke about when we were there. It talks about possession over the limit, which you're allowed to have 30 grams, illegal distribution or sale, illegal production, taking it across the border, because it's not legal in the States, but it will be here, giving or selling to someone under 18, using a youth to commit a crime related to. And all of those items that I just mentioned, the penalties for that range for anywhere from 5 to 14 years in prison. So they're very stiff.
So they're very strict.
Yeah. And that doesn't talk about fines. That's just right away incarceration. And so people need to be aware. And that's why we're having a look at this very seriously, that, if you want to get involved in the business, or even if you're just having possession, be careful what you do with it.
Yeah, and it's back to how it's been kind of rolled out. It sounded like free for all. Now all of a sudden they're pulling back. Like that those penalties are stricter than if you're driving under the influence, to be honest.
And this is what the PKs may be required to enforce, right? Because it's a federal law.
Absolutely.
Okay, so these are the items. And when we went through these at the session on Tuesday.
Okay. You're listening to K1037's Tetewathá show. It's MCK Friday, and joining me in studio are Gina Deer and Dennis Daibo. Welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Stacey, and we're talking cannabis control law. And then joining me in studio are Gina Deer, Chief Gina Deer, and Dennis Daibo. Now you have another meeting coming up this Tuesday.
Yes.
So you've learned through the first one. What are some of the things that you would recommend? And ask the community to come out with questions, come out and be prepared. What can the community do?
Well, we want them to be prepared to talk about the draft law that's before them. We understand, the interest in the commercial side, and that's why we're going to arrange to have a meeting specific to, the commercial side. But we're hoping that we can stay focused on, the law itself, and we welcome, the feedback. It's all been taken into consideration, and that's why we're on the air here today, trying to give a picture of the concerns and the answers too. They weren't satisfied at the time, with some of the answers, like the issues around the CDMP and how the process is going to be laid out. Well, these are 2 information sessions before the CDMP is to take place. It is important for us, the working group, that people are aware of all the aspects of the law before coming in to make a decision on whether to pass this as it is or change it. Now, something we want to say is that we've been mandated by MCK, and in that mandate, there's a purpose and there's a scope which we have to work within. At the meeting, people were kind of giving what-if scenarios. And, we can't answer what if. We have to work within the mandate we were given. And anything outside of that is going to take all of council to deliberate over. And, okay, do we expand? Do we retract? And that's only going to happen as time goes on. So there was discussion also about, another survey or referendum. And, all of these things have been taken into consideration, and we're discussing it and how we're going to accommodate community. Because, again, we're trying to keep them informed. We have a whole list of consultation activities that we have done since we had this group. And that's not going to stop.
So I guess it's basically the beginning, because I have a question. Have you spoken to traditional people and people of, say, the Confederacy and things, you know, I'm not sure what their position is on this.
Dennis, have views?
Well, they've issued a statement on that, saying that they don't support any growing or usage of it because it is a mind-altering substance and it's contrary to the principles of our traditions. So, but other than that, they have not, and we have not as well, engaged in any discussion with them, really.
Okay. No, I was just curious because I know I had a listener ask me the question before, and I thought it was a good question because, you know, sometimes, you know, is there something on that particular thing which adds to the law maybe being tighter? Then, you know what I mean?
Yes, and we did that in the past with the tobacco law. And I just want to remind people that, you know, the tobacco law, even though they haven't heard anything about it, the process is not over. We had recently met with the group talking about some of the concerns around the law, the way it's written. And there's some issues around the labor because we have a labor law, right? And we cannot have one law overpowering another. So we've, I think, ironed all that out. I'm waiting for feedback from the Kahnawake Tobacco Association, but we haven't given up or stopped on that. I know there was some concern that this law seems to be moving faster, but this law, again, is going to have a more dramatic effect to our community. And a lot of work, like I said, has been done and the mandate has been given and we're moving along, you know, with all the community members that are part of this.
So the question is what's the next steps after Tuesday's meeting? And what is the process for the law given that October 17th is quickly approaching?
Well, the next step would be to hold a CDMP hearing. So that will be... I'm not sure what the calendar is, you know, for that. Again, like I said, I'm not on the drafting team, but I know that it'll be relatively soon. And everything is being taken into consideration as we go along. We continuously are reaching out to community in one form or another, and all input is taken into account.
How far along in terms of a law does it have to be so that the federal government's law or provincial law doesn't apply here? Like, does it have to have something set? And then can you go back and adjust it? Is that how it works? Or I'm not familiar.
Well, in the absence of a law here, right, the federal does apply.
Okay. So if we do have something community that's just, say, a start, well, because I don't see this whole issue being dealt with between now and October 17th. Not as big as it is. So I would assume a law has to go in place to have something in place.
The other.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So then after that, can you adjust that law and can you make it to whatever the community would want it to be? And
don't quote me here, but
I should have asked this question.
I'm not that involved in you know, that process, but I believe any law that goes through has a 1 year revision, and in that 1 year, those amendments can be made.
Yeah. Okay. So with that 1 year, it gives enough time to be able to take some of this research, apply some of these things, and that was the question. Yeah, because it sounded like this is going to be the end all. Come October 17th, we're going to have a community law, but we haven't answered a lot of questions because as we're speaking, there's more questions.
Yes.
You know, and I'm sure as community asks questions, of course there'll be more questions because this is way bigger than just one issue or one law.
Absolutely.
And I think these information sessions with the community, I mean, it provides an opportunity for a two-way points of view to be made. And it gives us the opportunity to have a look at, okay, what needs to be adjusted in the law based on what we were just told prior to getting to the CDMP here.
Right.
Okay, so how much can we get done before we get there?
Because to me, there seems like there's a lot more work that will have to go into this.
And that's just the law itself. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, once the law goes through the process and MCK signs it off at some point, there's the regulatory side of it to see how it's going to be implemented. So we're just talking law right now, not the implementation.
And really this law will just come in place to supersede any other law. Displace. Yes. Okay. So now that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So we still got a lot more work to go. And
the target is, that day or prior to October 17. So.
Okay.
For the law itself.
Okay. For the law itself.
And then all the work around regulation will come thereafter.
And who gets involved with regulation? Is this legal people? Would it still be back to the committee?
If the law, as it's written, there will be a board that will take on that responsibility.
Okay. And that would be out to the community to get involved with, volunteer? Would it be made up of possibly the steering committee? What could it possibly look like?
I don't think that,
because I'm not familiar.
Yeah,
So.
I don't think the process for selecting for that board has been detailed out yet.
Okay.
I know there's going to be a cannabis control board. And
Okay.
they will be responsible for the regulatory side of it.
Right.
But there will also be, I think they're called a cannabis safety committee, just to ensure that safety is kept as the primary concern, and they're reviewing the not necessarily the law because it's already passed,
right,
but the regulatory side of it and the operation of businesses. So part of the point is like it hasn't been decided yet how and who would be appointed to the Cannabis Control Board, but there will be one, and they will look at the regulatory framework.
I have a question from a community member. Did MCK ask the people if they wanted to enforce zero tolerance?
Well, that's just it. We were saying we are still zero tolerance.
Right.
This has become or will become a legal product such as alcohol, and people have to start looking at it that way. We can still be zero tolerance, but cannabis is no longer a banned substance come October 17th.
Okay, so it's true. That's in the same vein as alcohol.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if I could add, like from my point of view, like I think by MCK developing and putting this law in place, it is in fact in part addressing the zero tolerance stance of the community. Okay, because this law, as Gina said, is being sort of forced on us whether we like it or not. And the drug that's in the cannabis was on the Controlled Substances Act. It's no longer going to be. But my position that I kept stating over and over during this process was that regardless of the laws on the outside, it does not change the opinion or the stance or the position of the community of Kahnawake. So how does this law relate to the zero tolerance stance?
Yeah.
And so far, like my opinion is that, okay, we can't change the federal law. It's being imposed. When the community, I don't think, is going to be easily, agreed to change their zero tolerance policy. They're not. So how does one relate to the other? And as I mentioned, there's the control part of the law that talks about the federal and the business side for the safety and health. And the control part also addresses and limiting what's coming here, access to, who's allowed to possess, what are they allowed to possess. So while we can't stop it, regardless of zero tolerance, we can control what's coming here as a sort of today's way of addressing zero tolerance related just to cannabis.
Because I remember the big issue when the alcohol law came into place, and the big issue back then was zero tolerance, but it was forcing a lot of people to leave the community,
yes,
and then to come back with it. So you still didn't reduce the harm reduction aspect of it. You had to look at the drinking and driving, going to and from other locations. So that didn't answer or address that particular one. And I remember that absolutely.
And currently is around cannabis, just, that it's illegal.
And it's already here. We're aware of it.
Yeah.
And if the community decides they don't want this law or us to address it, because it's going to be legal anyway all around us, or even if we have the law and say 21, doesn't stop people from going on the outside and going get what they want because it's legal everywhere. Right?
But what we have to keep in mind is there's no recourse for peacekeepers.
Yep.
The courts will not be hearing this. Nobody will be charging on this, right? Unless you break the federal laws.
Wow. It really kind of puts it in a different perspective.
Absolutely.
And like I said, you don't know how strict they're going to be or how strict each of the provinces is going to be. So it is going to be kind of open like a free-for-all. It should be interesting.
It's going to be a live and learn, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, and trial and error, and let's hope there's less error.
and I guess fatalities, because I guess unfortunately anytime you're dealing with mind-altering drugs, that's what usually happens. Whether you're operating a vehicle or, if you're responsible for other people's lives, it happens. Happens now.
Right.
Gina touched on it earlier, and without going into any names or locations, we're aware of incidences like that where maybe 2 months ago, one of our sister communities, there's an individual promoting medical marijuana, and that's what he's providing.
Yeah.
he has a shot. But 2 people went in there one day, and after they used it, one guy went into convulsions, parked on the side of the road or in the ditch or whatever, and kept, bouncing on the horn, and that's how people noticed there was something going on. And the other guy went into cold sweats and the shakes and blurred vision, and he had all kinds of reaction to the medicinal marijuana that was being sold there without any oversight or control on what actually is being sold.
And that's the whole point. You don't have, because you don't know. You don't know. You know, in these day and ages, in this day and age, you don't know what you're taking. A lot of these illegal drugs, I mean, drug dealers are getting more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Drug cartels are getting, you're impinging on their money.
And this is why we're being so proactive. MCK has a responsibility for the safety and well-being of community, and that's what we're doing this for.
Okay. So one more time on about the information session and what people could do, and if they have questions, who else could they call, in between if they can't make it
Well,
Tuesday?
there's Rhonda, Dennis, and myself, at MCK. 450-632-7500. Give us a call. People can email us questions if they like. We're always open for discussion. I've had people come in and meet with me or give me a call. So,
And you're open to that, right?
absolutely.
Okay. So Tuesday, where, when, time?
Tuesday at the Golden Age Club from 6 to 9.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming in. Always
Thank you.
informative. I'm sure
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
I'm sure you're going to be back. I'm sure once the law gets a little further along, we'll have you back in and explaining it.
Sure.
Have a great weekend, everybody, and Onagiwahi.